13 minutes. So you've got 13 minutes, around 12 and a half, I'll start cutting you off. Today, around 11 or so, I'll cut you off. You can see the extract itself is a little bit shorter than it should be. So what I'll do is, so start this over, and we'll go for about 11 minutes or so. You see this guy getting up there. You'll be wrapping up the conclusion, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And then I'll be taking some notes in the process and ask you a question at the end. Next year, probably about 2, based on some lovely things you say. So looks pretty smart. So tell me your name, whatever your name wants to be today. First name's fine. Some sort of made-up candidate number, so you get in the habit of doing that. Go through your thesis statement and your structure. Whenever you're ready, go right ahead.
Okay. My name is So Yoon, and my candidate session number is 0000. And today I'll be giving an individual oral commentary on a selected piece of work. The work I've selected is from The Bloody Chamber, which is from a larger collection of Angela Carter's work, The Bloody Chamber and Other Short Stories, which was published in 1979. And Carter is a British author and a poet, which is why there is a lot of poetic elements, such as poetic imagery or diction within her stories. And then also she's a postmodernist feminist, which is why there are few ideas that deviate from the norm. So this specific extract is from the beginning of The Bloody Chamber, when the protagonist, the heroine, is going from where she used to live with her mother to her fiance, her husband's castle. This extract is important in terms of what the story, The Bloody Chamber, is trying to convey, because it contains very important elements that show the dynamic change that the character protagonist goes through to convey the main message of the story. So in the story, Carter utilizes foreshadowing, characterization, and juxtaposition in her short story, The Bloody Chamber, from a larger collection, The Bloody Chamber and Other Short Stories, in order to reject female stereotype, the damsel in distress in most fairy tales, and portray conscious, self-driven, and authoritative female figures. So the passage starts off by setting where the protagonist is. She is currently in a train going to where her fiance lives. In line 2 to 4, it says, "The impeccable linen of the pillow and the pounding of my heart mimicking of the great piston ceaselessly thrusting the train that bore me through the night." This is foreshadowing, where it's foreshadowing what the protagonist is going to go through when she meets her husband. And this is specifically foreshadowing to the sexual encounter that she's going to have. And the sexual interaction between Marquis and the protagonist is important because that's where the male dominance is portrayed the most clearly. And that's what Carter is trying to reject throughout her stories. Also, when it says, "Great piston ceaselessly thrusting the train that bore me through the night," it's very rhythmic. Again, this is because Carter is a poet, which is why there are a lot of poetic elements. Also, the imagery of great piston ceaselessly thrusting, the rhythmic imagery shows that the train has gone here before, and it's also not the first time that a girl is going to Marquis' castle and is going to experience the same thing that our protagonist is going to. And then it continues on to line 5 to 7, where it says, "Away from girlhood, away from the white enclosed quietude of my mother's apartment, into the unguessable country of marriage." The first thing you notice is unguessable country. This is in reference to Gothic elements, which she normally references in her stories, and this is juxtaposition. Carter juxtaposes a lot of her stories with Gothic elements in order to contrast and emphasize the femininity elements of her story, because a lot of Gothic stories tend to show very oppressed female characters, which is contrasting to what Carter's female figures do. Also, "away from girlhood, away from the white enclosed," this sentence is another form of characterization where she's currently characterizing the protagonist to be a very weak figure, but this is important in terms of what it's foreshadowing, again, in terms of what Carter is trying to convey at the end of the story, of a very strong, conscious, self-driven, authoritative female figure. And then it goes on to line 11 to 13, where it says, holding up and putting away all my little relics, the tumbled garments I would not need anymore, the scores for which there had been no room in my trunks, the concert programs I had abandoned. This is another form of characterization where she is leaving behind basically who she is for him. And this again shows another form of very weak female characters. Also, the word relic is a form of diction, a specifically word chosen by the author to convey a specific message. And this is because she knows that she's not coming back to who she is. This is again foreshadowing to the change that the protagonist is going to go through towards her encounter with Marquis. And then it continues on to line 15 to 19, where it says, and in the midst of my bridal triumph, I felt a pang of loss, as if, when he put the gold band on my finger, I had in some way ceased to be her child, becoming his wife. This is another form of characterization which is very prominent in this extract, and this is specifically in reference to the loss of innocence. And Carter utilizes this theme a lot in a lot of her stories, the loss of innocence, because she says the loss of innocence is when female figures understand how they can be self-driven and how they're conscious of who they are and how they can be the decider of their own fate. And then it continues on to line 19, where it talks about the wedding dress that the protagonist husband sent them. And then it says, are you sure, she said, when they delivered the gigantic box that held the wedding dress. The wedding dress here is juxtaposed with black silk, the dress that the mother receives in line 24. And this juxtaposing the mother and the daughter figure. And this is emphasis on the development of the daughter figure that we'll go through later, because the mother figure is who's going to come and save her at the end of the story. It's not another male figure, but rather the female figure that will come and rescue the damsel in distress, which is the protagonist in this case. And this, again, plays a big role in emphasizing rejecting female stereotypes and portraying conscious, self-driven, authoritative female figures. And then in line 23, it says, the mother asks a question to the protagonist saying, are you sure you love him? And this is a characterization of the mother. And by asking, the mother is already an empowered figure, because usually in Gothic figures, when a female is being sent to marry a fiance, someone unknown, they don't really have a choice. But by asking, the mother is already conscious of what is happening, and she's an empowered figure. Also, in line 23 to line 25, it continues on with the characterization of the mother, where it says, with the dull prismatic sheen of oil on water, finer than anything she'd worn since that adventurous girlhood in Indochina, daughter of a rich tea planter. And then it continues on by saying that she has done other things that normal female figures wouldn't do, such as outfaced a junk full of Chinese pirates, nursed a village through a visitation of the plague, shot a man-eating tiger with her own hand, and all before she was as old as I. And this is another form of imagery that Carter incorporates in order to show and emphasize the strength and the empowered mother figure in contrast to the protagonist. And then the extract ends by just saying, are you sure you love him? I'm sure I want to marry him, I said. This goes back to the question in line 23, where the mother questions her daughter's choices. Again, this is about portraying the conscious, self-driven female figures, unlike other female figures in fairy tales or in Gothic stories, where the stereotype female figure doesn't know what's happening and she's sort of oppressed into doing what other people tell her. So in this extract, it's important to understand the development the female character is going to go through throughout the progression of the Bloody Chamber story. And this extract is important in juxtaposing the weak female character with the strong one to later emphasize how the protagonist changes into a much more developed and conscious, self-driven, authoritative female figure.
Okay, cool. Good. Nice. Kind of just answered one of my questions at the end, so good. That's fantastic. So now I'm going to ask you maybe a bit more complicated question. You did fairly well with your addressing of the mother and the characterization below, and came to the choice references supporting that, and her being, as you put, an empowered female figure. And you use this sort of exchange, the dialogue here between in 30 and 31. Are you sure you love him? I'm sure I want to marry him. And you said the questioning, the mother questioning her daughter in this sense, it supports her being empowered. But, and I don't disagree with her, she's an opinion. But how does this question or her even asking her daughter or bothering to ask her or entertaining the idea of asking her daughter about this, does that support her being empowered? Since we could sort of all surmise that it is essentially going to be a mistake for her, what does that do with Carter's characterization of this empowered mother figure? What else does it potentially add to this character by this latent characterization of her not putting her foot down kind of thing?
I think perhaps by giving the daughter, the protagonist, the freedom to choose for her own, I think that's another important message that Carter conveys in other short stories in the Bloody Chamber, of going through and experiencing it for themselves and and realizing the mistakes the female figure has made through experiencing it firsthand. And if the mother were to decide for her daughter, then the message wouldn't be as clear, because then it'd be another form of oppression and suppressing the female self-driven and conscious element. Because by letting her choose, she's deciding her own fate, and that's where the important part of being conscious, self-driven, and authoritative, someone who's in charge of their own life, is emphasized.
I like that answer. And I think in that situation, I think that exchange actually allowed you to go a little bit deeper. So in that sense, it was fairly successful. How'd you do?
I was nervous.
That's natural. You're supposed to be. I mean, it's a small amount of time and you're not really sure what you're going to get. So it is a stressful assessment. Outside of that, how'd you do?
I don't know. I feel like I've missed a lot from the second paragraph.
Do you?
Yeah, because I remember talking about it in class a lot.
We actually talked about this guy in class.
Yeah.
That's the same part. It's still a mark, so big deal. I mean, I feel you hit the big marks, yeah. So you talked about this moving on, and this it is loss of innocence, and her. I think if you did say sacrifice without really sacrifice, but that's essentially what you got at. There were some bits and pieces, but you certainly clarified the foreshadowing, which is important. I really like how you put the work into context. I think it's erroneous for people just to talk about this, because it's such a complicated, rich text that it's not like, in chapter 2, this is what happens kind of thing. All of this has some sort of bearing on further events. It would have been nice if you had mentioned the point of view. I think that's huge with this short story. Because, and I wanted to think about all this potentially. We talked about it quite a bit, but it's first person, and that is divergent from the standard sort of things. And that being said, maybe if you mentioned some more about, or just a bit, once again, I like how you put this specific work into context in terms of the Bloody Chamber stories, but also in terms of the Bloody Chamber. You talked a little bit about the Bluebeard thing. It might have been nice. Only because I think it's relevant, especially with her. If we're talking about anything which is sort of background information, all the stuff you mentioned I thought was applicable. But how has she changed this, and what has she left on purpose, and maybe what has she altered? Because this first person perspective thing is really cool. It's huge here because this is after the fact, right? So she's telling it kind of like in real time, but it's certainly not real time because we got the past tense verb choice. And the fact that you talk about this growth in terms of her being what she used to be and what she is now. Now she's at this weird sort of crossroads where she's telling this story and having to have sort of elements of both.
Mm-hmm.
I knew better. So the word choice supports both. And we have like this positive connotation about the delicious ecstasy of excitement. You know, she's not being dishonest and letting us know that's how she felt,
Mhm.
which supports her. This is where she was, and this is where she's going. I think this passage really, even though it doesn't explicitly say, I was this, I became that, it's just the way it's actually told in the diction in terms of connotation and denotation, even, if you will. And she has this other stuff which becomes sort of wasn't good, you know. The same passage, the delicious ecstasy of excitement, and then this unguessable country of marriage. And the word abandoned, you know, that one's heavy. Giving up on things, giving up on all this other stuff, including her potential success as being a musician. Development, progression, weak female character to a strong one. I'm not sure about the Gothic business. Is it really juxtaposition or is it just some sort of maybe? And I get what you're saying. You know, it would have been nice if you tossed the word archetype in there.
Oh, okay.
Which, I mean, you certainly said it in numerous ways, but she really is an archetype if she is this thing from distress character. And he's a hyperbolized. I mean, he's not. I mean, no, he is the embodiment of this historical character. Good. So the second paragraph. Hang on, the second paragraph. You picked up on the word relics, right? And the word choice and what that means. Past, she's giving out her previous life. It's what I had. You had that. She calls this her bridal triumph. Pick up on that word. It's big. In the midst of my, there's zero negative aspects with that word triumph. It's just like, you know, what is she sort of being triumphant? You know, allowing herself to be married off, or succumbing physically to this male. What is that? And is that the naive? That's that cool, weird narrative thing. Is that word choice from a previous perspective, or is this more reflective, experienced adult perspective? I think you're really good, especially considering this is a year one thing. You know, you got the characterization of the mom. There's some other stuff in there. There's, you know, her prose is so rich. There's always something you can get at. But there were small little things, the big that she got. I would have liked to have talked about, even though it's not technically incorrect the way it's written down here, because it is. This is how you would go about it. But when we physically look at the page, this is going back to that poetry thing. It's like that dialogue is so important, and it's just kind of offset, floating there by itself. There's no other way to put it. But she certainly. It's offset because there's not dialogue. I said, or you know, it says like whatever, but you know, there's nothing else there to sort of distract us from these two lines in exchange, and what that really entails. And it's a horrible thing the way it's written there in terms of what this moment is for her. You know, that she's removed love out of the situation, and that's going back to that sort of modern potential commentary. It's like, why would this smart, capable girl give up on what everybody inherently wants, regardless of your social class? Everybody wants that idea of actually, the person who lives her life has to have some sort of romantic inclination. And she's like, I'm sure I want to marry him. So she's essentially doing this for all these wrong reasons, and that's that cardboard that needed some more attention. I think he did good about the pitfall with her is, you know, just to say gender roles or some sort of changing of this, or the women can now do this, because each passage is certainly there, and I think he did good at the bottom in terms of. This is where she was, this is where she's going, and I liked how you addressed the whole mom thing. And maybe the mom made a mistake. You know, maybe people aren't perfect, so she's getting
fairy tales don't exist in this sense. We don't have these archetypes. It's great. The only archetypes we have in this are people who aren't really real. The Marquis, it's not a cross section of any sort of society. It's more symbolic aspects. But the mom, sure, your mom can be a badass, but she can still make mistakes. You can be very smart and have a world of potential, but you will also fall into these other mistakes. And she shouldn't need this guy. She took the wrong choice because she felt, for whatever reason, even in this very liberal alternative family structure, she still had that sort of obligated mindset that she had to do this, which is unfortunate. I think that's one of the larger comments in this passage and in the work as a whole. So it's a strong score. I'll put it in there. Okay. I know you want to know it, but it's definitely a 6. If it was next year, it would be equally as strong. Honestly, I have no issues. It's going to be a longer passage, but I think you did a very proper job of this. It's a good job, right? Thanks.
Do I leave this here or do I take it?
I want you to take that with you because I'm going to send you the link to this and some sort of reflective document. And I'd like you to look at that and make sure there's nothing you missed.
Okay.
So do you feel like you did a good job of organizing?